Hello, I'm Dr. Nkem Adeleye, lecturer in law at Newman University, Birmingham. I'll be talking about the legal implications of the lockdown imposed following the COVID-19 pandemic. While these restrictions might be unprecedented, they have been imposed by the government. And in this video, I will discuss the legality of imposing a lockdown. How much does a lockdown impinge on our interests and fundamental rights? Is a lockdown overly intrusive? Does the government have a right to restrict my movement and interactions with extended family members with a lockdown? Or does the government have a duty to protect citizens from a pestilence or a pandemic? Now, the government initially introduced voluntary social distancing measures late January when COVID-19 pandemic spread to the UK. We were told to keep a safe distance, wash your hands regularly, and for 20 seconds, avoid touching your face. By March 11th, the World Health Organization declared the pandemic. Now, by this time, we saw incidents of panic buying in the UK. 4 days later, the government told everyone to avoid non-essential travel and contact with others, work from home, avoid crowds, and those with symptoms and immunocompromised and vulnerable persons were advised to self-isolate. Now, schools were shut on 20th March, restaurant, pubs, all gatherings banned, businesses, amenities, places of worship, and were instructed to stay at home. The Department of Health and Social Care then launched a campaign to help slow the rate of the virus with posts of daily updates. Now, the CMO, Professor Chris Whitty, outlined a 4-pronged strategy to contain, delay, research, and mitigate. Now, the latest government figures have revealed a high incidence of confirmed cases and a total of 33,614 deaths, which reveal that it does pose a serious threat to lives. Now, let's consider the legislation which brought this lockdown to in force. We'll look at this chronologically, starting with the Public Health Act of 1984. Now, Section 45 of this Act empowers the Secretary of State to impose restrictions on social events, gatherings, and to implement a lockdown. Secondly, it provides a framework for the exercise of powers by magistrates to make health protection orders against individuals or groups of individuals. Now, this is the enabling act that led to the Health Protection Regulations 2020. This is a secondary legislation. Now, these regulations gave police the power to arrest and fine people for violating the lockdown. Now, you can see the instructions on the screen. It's been amended twice, once on 22nd of April and on 13th May. Now, the 22 April amendment made it illegal to leave home or remain outside without reasonable excuse. These restrictions were eased a bit with the 13th May amendments, and increased freedoms were introduced, but with related government guidance. Now, if you follow the statistics, you will find that about 14,000 people have been fined for alleged breach of lockdown laws. Around 56 of these have been found to be wrongly charged. And then finally, the Coronavirus Act of 2020. This was passed in less than 3 days and received royal assent on 25th March. One key feature in the Act is the reduction of unnecessary social contact in order to contain and slow the rate of spread of the virus. Now, it also strengthens quarantine powers of police and immigration officers. Now, let's look at the human rights legislation. What rights do I have? These are contained in the Human Rights Act of 1998, and the relevant sections will be Article 5. Article 5 protects your right to liberty and security. Article 8, your respect for private and family life. Article 9 protects your freedom of thought, belief, and religion, which will be restricted if public worship and gathering is restricted. Article 11 protects your freedom of assembly and association. Now, these are rights which have been affected by the lockdown, so to speak. Article 5, however, subsection E, allows the government to impose restrictions for the prevention of spreading of infectious diseases. So this, in fact, justifies the lockdown, and the European Court of Human Rights in Enhorn and Sweden allows a state to pursue a lockdown as a last resort. Now, the virus itself has been known to have a long incubation period. It's atypical. It can be transmitted by asymptomatic people, and it grows exponentially, and the prospects of a vaccine are very slim. And as a result of this, states have a positive duty to protect the right to life, especially from natural hazards, including pestilences. So the state should be expected to take preventative measures to reduce the risk to human life. Now, what if I am displeased about this and I think this is bad law? The question then is the lockdown legally effective and disproportionate? Now, individuals have the right to bring an action against the decisions of the state, and they can do this through a judicial review. And this can be done by bringing a claim for the courts to review the actions, decisions, and policies of government ministers. A businessman, Simon Nolan, has expressed his intention to issue proceedings for judicial review challenging the legality of the lockdown. Now, he believes that more people are likely to die from the lockdown than lives being saved. His concerns were the lockdown would lead to fewer cancer referrals and chemotherapy, which will ultimately lead to more cancer deaths. The University College London have predicted about 18,000 deaths at the end of the lockdown. He's concerned about job losses, increase in domestic violence, and he wants the government to restore the public's right to decide for themselves if they want to go out or stay indoors. In effect, he believes that the restrictions are draconian. So he challenges the government on three main points. One of them is that the lockdown is ultra-virus. That means it is outside the powers of the state. And outside, they have no legal authority to implement this. Secondly, he argues that the reimposed lockdown is disproportionate in law because the test to determine the effect of containing the disease was too rigid, and the impact on the economy was not considered, impact on jobs and the wider health. Finally, he argues that it breaches the fundamental rights which we've outlined in the Human Rights Act of 1998. So, this is certainly not the end. There's a new normal in sight and an expansion, possibly, of human rights law. Experts, on the one hand, have warned the government of the dangers of easing the lockdown too early for fear of a fresh coronavirus wave. And others are concerned about the impact on the economy and society at large. The government have set out 5 key tests which must be met before the lockdown can be significantly eased. And one of these is measuring the increase or decrease of the R value, which is the effective reproductive number. How many people can become infected by a sufferer or a carrier of the virus? Now, if this reduces, the lockdown will be eased. Otherwise, it's possible that we might have more petitions from people like Simon Nolan. Now, while this crisis is unprecedented, The dichotomy is as well, because we have the government on the one hand with a right to protect the life of its citizens, and individuals fearing that other fundamental rights are being restricted by the lockdown. So let's watch this space and see the outcome of this petition. While you're doing that, remember to stay safe and think of Newman. Thank you.